When most players are looking to get a quality pair of football boots, they'll usually look at options around $100 to $200. And that's because oftentimes cheaper models can be bulky, uncomfortable, and just generally not that fun to play in. And that got me thinking, how does the cheapest Nike boot on the market actually stack up against the competition? Well, in this video, we're going to be addressing exactly that because we have the Tiempo Legend 10 Club, which retails for as little as $50. I've had these for a couple weeks now, so we're going to talk about how they feel on feet, and then we're going to discuss if they're worth the money as a budget option. And of course, we'll compare them to other options that are in a similar price range. And if you're interested in picking up these Tiempos or any of the other football boots we discussed, you can find links to them on sale with discount codes in the description below. When it comes to the design, honestly, if you have seen any pair from the current Tiempo line, this is going to feel really familiar. The upper is going to retain the Fly Touch name from the more expensive versions, but that being said, this synthetic leather material is going to be a little bit thicker throughout the length of the boot compared to those more expensive options. That being said, it still feels pretty soft and premium to the touch, although admittedly not quite as flexible as the Tiempo Legend 10 Pro or Elite models, which retail for about $150 and $210 respectively. But I'm not sure if this camera is going to pick it up, but even on this $50 club version, you still kind of get this faux leather texturing throughout the upper, which I wasn't actually expecting with this football boot, so that's nice that they've left that in. Although I think it's generally a shame that Nike has shifted away from using leather on a lot of their football boots, I actually do like what they've done with the synthetic on the Fly Touch in both this model and the other Tiempo versions, because honestly, I've tried some really cheap leather football boots in the $70 or $80 price range, and a bad leather football boot can easily be way worse than a synthetic model. So for those of you who are really concerned about the shift from leather to synthetic, I still think that models from the Tiempo series are worth giving a try. Now the tongue is going to be pretty traditional. It's just going to be this small piece of detached synthetic. I will say one criticism about the tongue and the lacing system is that I do just wish the tongue was a little bit longer up towards the ankle because I feel like it almost gets lost around the top of the foot. But that being said, the material that's used for the tongue is pretty soft and generally I find it pretty inoffensive. The only way that you could get an upgraded version of this tongue is if you went all the way up to the Pro model, which is going to be around $130 to $150. And on the Legend 10 Pro, you're going to actually have this compression fit elasticated material all around your foot instead of a traditional tongue. But on this more affordable version, this standalone tongue will do. And then in the heel area, it is also going to be a little bit bulkier compared to the more expensive versions like the Pro and the Elite. But that being said, the material is still pretty soft. And when you've got them on feet, as we'll discuss later, it's really a pretty comfortable heel. Moving on to the sole plate, the Legend 10 clubs are going to come with Nike's FG stud configuration, which is going to be identical to what you will find on the Pro and Elite FG versions. Now, based on my research, I was only able to find this $50 club version in FG models. Now, if you do want an artificial grass specific variation, those do also start at the Legend 10 Pro model, which usually will come in around $100 to $110. It really just depends if it's on sale. Now, as we'll discuss later, this sole plate is somewhat versatile because it has a lot of conical studs throughout the midfoot, but that being said, it does have some bladed studs at the top of the forefoot, which are quite sharp, and then maybe more notably, it does have 4 bladed studs in the heel area, which are going to dig into the ground pretty aggressively. I tested these out on artificial grass myself, but it was a controlled solo training environment, so if you are playing in a more competitive match, I'd probably try and find a sole plate that's more suited just for artificial grass. Now, in terms of the stiffness and flexion of the sole plate, some people are going to tell you that they can find a difference between the more affordable models and the more expensive models, but I would say this is really similar to the Pro and Elite versions. It's going to have a medium to slightly firm flex throughout the length of the boots. You're going to get a decent amount of spring in the toe box, but it's a little bit harder to bend the boots around the midfoot area. And for those looking for clarity on Nike's product line, the club is the 4th tier takedown model, so it's going to go Elite at the top, followed by Pro, then Academy, and then Club. And I tested out the 3rd tier Nike Tiempo Legend 10 Academy, which retails for $80. I tried those on a few months ago, and I gotta be honest, it's really hard to find differences between the $50 club model and the $80 Academy one. Next up, let's get into fit and feel. So I've touched on some notes regarding the fit of these boots already, but I've got to say I found these were really impressive for the price. Now I found the fit to be really streamlined and close to the foot. So once I got my feet inside these boots, there was really no extra space whatsoever all the way from the heel to the top of the toe box. And like a lot of other Nike models across the board, I did find that these run pretty snug. But one thing I really appreciated as I was lacing these up is that the heel cup feels sufficiently deep to the point where my heel isn't slipping out of the boots, which I can tell you really does often happen on more affordable models, especially when we talk about second, third, and fourth tier takedowns. Now, in terms of shape and sizing, I got these in my standard 10.5 US, and as I mentioned, there was no extra space in the boots whatsoever. So for players looking for that close sensation, I would recommend going true to size. But if you're someone who likes to have a little bit more of a roomy feel in your boots, you could consider going up about a half size. And then in terms of width, which is a question a lot of players have, including myself, I found that these were on the slightly narrower side of average. But that being said, surprisingly, as is the case with many other Nike boots, despite the fact that they run pretty slim, I didn't really feel too many pressure points throughout the front of my foot. And for me, that's a pretty good sign because I tend to have pretty wide feet. But that being said, this isn't a pair of boots that are going to allow your toes to spread out really wide, so if you are looking for a more specifically wider option, you might be better off checking out a brand like New Balance or even going for something like the Copa Gloro from Adidas. Also, if you wanted to, you could check out natural leather football boots, which might give you a little bit more stretch towards the front of the boots. But I'll be honest with you guys, when I'm trying on a pair of football boots that only cost me $50, I'm usually expecting the worst when it comes to fit, and I think that they're going to be really uncomfortable going into the experience. So these definitely did impress me, and I do think that they're a good option when it comes to the price. Now, when it comes to playability, there were two things that I wanted to focus on the most, and those were lockdown and comfort. Because these are two features that oftentimes tend to be pretty weak in more affordable or budget football boots. But as I mentioned earlier, when I was running and making sharp changes of direction, I found the lockdown was really good and both my ankle and heel felt secure in the boots. And then in terms of comfort, I was playing in these for a little over an hour and I didn't feel any pressure points build up throughout the heel, ankle, or toe box. But that being said, they do run pretty slim, and after playing for a little while, I did feel really relieved when I took the boots off my feet. So for players with really wide feet, you might struggle going for really long sessions in these. But for those of you with average to narrower shaped feet, then you might feel at home. Traction was really good on these as well, and for the most part, I felt pretty safe using these on artificial grass, and I think the reason for that is the bladed studs that are towards the top of the toe box here are really short compared to the rest of the studs, so they're not in contact with the ground for the majority of the time that you're playing. But I will say I did specifically notice the 4 bladed studs in the heel area. Personally, I almost wish that they were conical studs here just to add a little bit less aggression to the bottom of the boots and allow them to rotate a little bit more freely in the ground. And then my final note on playability for these is that you do get a pretty sensitive touch on the ball from this variation of the Fly Touch upper. And I really appreciate that because on some cheaper models, the upper can be so bulky that you feel really disconnected from the ball when you're dribbling or juggling, but that wasn't the case with these. Next up, let's talk about value. So when I picked up the Tiempo Legend 10 clubs, I got them for $50 USD, and for that price, you really can't complain. And I'm being dead serious when I tell you I have bought $150 football boots that feel measurably worse than these. And when it comes to the price point of other Nike models, you can find the Tiempo Legend 10 Academy, which is one step above this, retailing for around $80. So depending on the specific deal you find, there's usually going to be around a $20 to $30 difference between the club and the Academy model. And honestly, I am scratching my head to tell what the exact differences are between those two boots. So if you truly are on a budget where you're trying to spend as little as possible, I feel like it almost makes sense to go for the club model. And then if you really wanted to save up more and get a slightly more upgraded option, you'd probably be better off saving up to $100 where you can find a pair of the Pros on sale. And I gotta say, after racking my brain, one of the only competing football boots that I've tried on in the past that is around the same price point as these would be the Adidas Stiletto 8, which I picked up for about $45. Now, I did a full video review on those at the time because they were up to that point the cheapest pair of boots I'd ever tried on, and while they were okay, I would definitely take the Legend 10 clubs over the Stiletto. They just have slightly better lockdown around the ankle and heel, and I find that the materials just feel a bit more premium. Speaking of other options, let's talk about the competition. So overall, I'd say the Tiempo Legend 10 is in pretty good company with the other club models that Nike offers. Because Nike has 3 different of these 4th tier budget club models, one being the Tiempo that we have here, the other being the Phantom, and the other being the Vapor. Now the club versions of the Phantom and the Vapor are perfectly functional football boots that I think would work for a lot of people shopping on a budget, but I'd say the only odd thing about those boots is that they don't really have anything in common other than the slight resemblance to their more premium counterparts. Whereas the Legend 10 Club, to a degree, kind of looks and feels pretty similar to a top-end Tiempo. So if that $50 price point is your absolute ceiling, I'd say that Legend 10 Club is really hard to beat. But that being said, say if you were to spend just around $40 more than this and expand your budget up towards $90 to $100, then you have some really cool models to choose from. For example, if you do go up closer to that $90 price point, you can check out boots like the F50 League from Adidas, or the Copa Gloro 2, or even the Nike Premier 3. And even the Tiempo Legend 10 Pro from Nike, which typically retails for $130 full price, that boot's been out for a while, so it's often on sale and you can usually find it for closer to $100. And if you are able to save up to that, I would absolutely say that the Legend 10 Pro is a really worthy upgrade over the Legend 10 Club. So what are my final thoughts? With the Tiempo Legend 10 Club from Nike, you're not going to get a particularly thin or lightweight design, and you're not going to get cutting edge materials either. But what you do get is a pretty decent fit throughout the length of the boots, and also solid lockdown. And so I definitely think these are going to be a good option for a player who's just looking for an affordable pair of boots to get out there on the pitch. Thank you guys for watching the video, and let me know if you've had the chance to try on these boots, and also let me know what your favorite affordable football boot is. If you haven't already, please leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys on the next one.